upcoming special overclocking how-to guide on the Intel 10900K video, where you will be able to take it up to 5, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3 even, pending silicon quality, on a basic overclocking guide session that I'm going to show you how to implement these settings. And as a result, you may get what we've got over here, which is time spy at 19552 with a 6900 XT coupled with the 10900K, but our CPU score over here 14054. 99% of all results, it is better than, and that's just with a stock GPU, non-overclock. But over here, 5.2 gigahertz, guys. That's what we're aiming for. Most of your CPUs will get 5 gigahertz all cores. Easily implement those settings. Yeah, I just made it inactive. I didn't make it inactive. I disabled it. Why is it going to fuck up my thing again? Yo, and welcome back to the Techness Corner. So, you decided to dabble in the fine arts, the black arts, should we say, of the overclocking. Tisk tisk, has it been overclocked? No, it hasn't. Remember to say that. Otherwise, you may not be able to sell that. With that being said, any disclaimers aside, I'm probably going to mention them in the next minute or two anyway. Hello guys, so finally we're just testing out this overclock in relation to the CPU and its stability. I've been having some trouble with my graphics card. I've been tweaking and playing around with it too much, but hopefully this will come out. We're playing DirectX 12 Time Spy now, but here she goes to the big jump, guys. Whoa! So frame wise, it's rather low. Like, by the way, the clock on the 6900 XT is running in default currently, so don't expect much. There's only a slight overclock on the memory, and the memory's turned into fast timings, but ever so slight, like 80 megahertz on the 2000 capability of it, so it's only up about 80 clicks. And apart from that, we've got just an assertive fan profile that's activated, and nothing else is being changed on it. Completely stock, with all settings disabled that you have to disable, so that Time Spy will validate the run. In BIOS, this capture card doesn't read the BIOS. It's very annoying. I need to better find a better capture card. This was a decent capture card that everyone talks about, yet they never mention it won't pick up the BIOS, bros. Anyway, so here's the CPU render. It's doing really well. It's in the 70s, going back to the 60s, pulling it now back to the 40s. It should be an average, like I reckon 49 or something, or higher, at least. Please wait, guys. So I just realized I have to reset the capture card to get this resolution done proper. 19552, it's good, nothing special. Average is 19246. So we did great in that regards. CPU score was decent at 14054. And the graphics score was just a measly 21002. I've definitely gotten higher on the graphics, but the CPU score was fairly solid. Pretty much it held the 5.2 frequency the whole fucking way. Okay, so see these dips? They're very aggressive, and these are in between the runs, in between the tests themselves, okay, these dips. And that's what kills an unstable card, frankly, because these dips, like, it just turns it off and on and just goes boom, boom. And if it's not stable, just like V-droop regarding a CPU, overclock and whatnot, please tell me it's a good run. Time Spy, it's a good run. This score is fair and accurate and a measure of system performance. You should only use valid results when comparing benchmark scores. Yeah, I like it when it says that. Unfortunately, all my higher runs are never validated, and I'm not doing anything, you know, weird. Well, that's a point. I'm running a 4K monitor at 1440p and the 4K resolution on the background at 144 hertz with variable refresh rate active. It could be doing something that otherwise it wouldn't be doing if I just use a 1080p monitor and asked it to render in 1440p, because it will do that as Time Spy. Time Spy will do that. I show that in Tech Consults episode 5.0, where we used a 1080p monitor that's just behind me to my left, and we were using that for the renders and stuff and everything, and the explanation to the customers, clients, and the showcasing you guys, because it was easier to capture that than a 43-inch or a 50-inch monitor in front of me with a camera. Like, if I was to tinker with it, then come back, it'll say it's not valid because you tinkered with the shit. It's like, so what? They can have non-tinkered stuff in NVIDIA, but AMD can't be tinkered? Anyway, so let's have a look at compare results online. We'll just get a semblance of, I'll say 97th percentile. If it says 96, I'll be even more annoyed. Better than 99% of all results. That's nice. So we've got a CPU score 14054. If you guys are interested and you currently have an Intel i9 10900K processor from yesteryear, from around the 2020 era, guys, essentially, you know, you may have bias envy and whatnot. And if you've got bias envy, then let's unleash the beast that are these 10900Ks, and they should, without some basic settings that I'll show you guys how to implement in the overclock session, get you guys up to at least 5 gigahertz quite easily dialed in, but up to maybe 5.2, maybe 5.3 if you've won the silicon lottery. So guys, 65 Celsius was the average temperature. It was average clock frequency was 5164 megahertz. And yeah, guys, I am quite content with that overclock. It's passing TimeSpy DirectX 12 1440p render, and very, very content, guys. Welcome to the Techness Corner. Yeah, let's get stuck right on into what we're doing today, which is overclocking our 10th gen processors. So let's go. Okay, so I firstly want to apologize for the fact that, as you can see, the screen be what it be. So I've got a camera just down here. Unfortunately, the screen capture software does not capture the screen in the BIOS. So yeah, so essentially, long story short, we're going to go into the BIOS, and that's where we're going to set this overclock up. So it's nothing scary. These settings will be borderline copy and paste, and only going to be for what is a fixed overclock, guys. And by being fixed, that I mean variability aside, the frequency is going to be locked, except for a couple of features that may or may not be implemented by yourself, depending on what you guys desire to do. So without piss fighting around too longer, we have to get into the BIOS. Easiest way to do that is to restart your computer, and generally you press either F2 or delete, and it'll take you into the BIOS. So let's go. After the restart, you will be pressing the delete key more than likely. And that's where we talk about and laugh about the mashing of the delete key. I'm just going to randomly press it up until the point and delete to enter setup. And we've entered setup. So what I'm running on is a Gigabyte Aorus Master. These settings will generally be very, very similar. They may be located in different areas for you all. Okay, so the cool thing about the Aorus boards and the Aorus Master is we've got the luxury of having a little favorite section, and that favorite section enables you to put in some basic settings which you may or not fiddle around more than likely more than others. Okay, so currently we've got this CPU clock that, if we have a look over here, I don't normally use the mouse pointer in the BIOS, but it's a good thing for what we've got here. Currently we've got the CPU set at 5.1 gigahertz or 5101 megahertz. Okay, it's utilizing only 1.260 volts currently. Okay, now with that being said, and I'll go into a more comprehensive section, which is the tweaker section. Okay, now the only other settings you have to enter in are your XMP profiles, which are always recommended. So XMP profiles, extreme memory profile, you will normally hit that, and or disable profile 1. Now I'm going to show you these settings. I've got a decent overclock currently set up, like I just mentioned, at 5.1 gigahertz all cores. Okay, and that's what we're trying to enable with you guys. Like I said earlier, these chips should be able to handle 5 gigahertz on all cores if you got that 10700 or 10900K, and it's worthwhile trying these, and you will be trying them at a lower voltage, so a CPU V core, than what I've got currently at the 5.1. This is borderline slightly excessive for my chip. It's just coming off being on 5.2 gigahertz, but I realized there was some instability in relation to some things. So unfortunately, I haven't got a silicon lottery winning chip, and had to subdue it to 5.1, but it's still very, very healthy. And something else you have to consider, the temperature, it's in range of being safe. Okay, so if we go through the settings, CPU upgrade, I've got the option of putting it into an overdrive mode where it's a +1 or a +3. This comes with Gigabyte. With those type of settings, the Asus motherboards and whatnot have the ability of being able to overclock and tweak, and you put everything on default and it'll turn those off. CPU base clock 100. Okay, clock frequency on the PCIe DMI PEG 100 as well, so otherwise not on auto, because what you want to do is you want to make sure that your B clock and your frequency of your RAM remains locked as well. Okay, you don't want it at all being variable whatsoever, okay, because it brings in instability potentially to a fixed all-core overclock. Okay, now enhanced multi-core, I've got that enabled. That's when the highest turbo ratio is applied to all CPU cores, so it's worthwhile noting that. Okay, CPU clock ratio, that on the other hand, the base clock's at 37 or 3700 megahertz on these 10900Ks, which I'll use as an example. I've got that at 51. Set that at 50. Set it high if you want to start with, but what I suggest, set it at 49 or set it at 50. Okay, for me 51's the sweet spot. That's where I've got them to. Your ring ratio you want to have at least 5 offset of the 51 would be a decent amount. So you want to raise it from 43 or so and take it up to about 46 or 45, 46, 47. I've got mine at 48, which is pretty decent as well. IGP ratio, you leave that on auto. AVX offset, on the other hand, is the amount that the CPU will be using under certain loads, AVX loads specifically. And that 2 figure, which I've got, is a down clock of 51. So it'll be at 49 or 4,900 megahertz when under sort of like rendering loads and that, like say any sort of like workloads and that which are heavily intensive that utilize AVX offsets and stuff. So in that regards, you can, if you're going for an all-core overclock, I had this CPU on 5 gigahertz all-core with an AVX offset of 0 at one stage, and it worked fine. But just understand, under those loads, under 100% load on each CPU, it may be running stable, but it may be pulling too much heat, and for not much longer, it won't last much longer. So to be safe and sorry, just start off with either having it on 0 if you're starting out lower at the 4.9 or 5. Otherwise, put it on, I'd say about 2 or 3, 2 or 4, depending on how you're going. And you'll find yourself in a much better position where it will boost up to that 5.1 or 5 or 5.2 or even 5.3 if you're lucky with the silicon quality. But when smashing the CPU on all cores and asking it to perform tasks for you, like video rendering or something, it will be dropping down and it'll be in a safe zone. Otherwise, it won't maintain that on all cores for very long. That's something you guys have to understand. Okay, on the other hand, on the RAM, I've got the XMP profile activated, but I've also added 200 megahertz. So I've got a slight overclock on the RAM. That always helps as well. If you can manage to do that, then great. But don't put all these settings in, all these finer tweaks in, when and at all at the same time. Okay, so work your way in. So what I suggest is start off on default 100 multi-core can be enabled. Start low on 49 on the CPU clock ratio. Ring ratio on the other hand can be probably on the 46 or so. IGP ratio on auto, AVX 2 down below. Okay, then your profile, your XMP profile, always have that enabled. Memory reference clock auto, memory odd ratios on auto. Okay, and then you go into V-core voltage mode, and some motherboards don't have the adaptive V-core, but the override V-core auto, you want to go into fixed V-core. Then to start off on a CPU V-core, which is your voltage rate for your CPU, okay, I would fix that to If you're on about 5 gigahertz, you should be able to do it quite comfortably at 1.3 volts, okay? If it works, then retest after testing stability and it's working fine and you don't need that extra voltage, tone it down. So from 1.3, go to 1.295, go to 1.29, even go to 1.275 after the fact, and then readdress once you get into Windows and test stability. And if it's still working, you've saved yourself some what would have been excess heat and power being utilized by the processor. That's a very good way, and that's what we call undervolting, guys. So that's something to look into as well, but that's something to also, you want to start tweaking once you get in, because it's quite easy to put in 1.365 and do fine and be within limit, but you could realize that you could be 20 degrees cooler and have a higher all-core overclock without even breaking a sweat, just by undervolting your CPU as well. But today we're overclocking. When it comes to dynamic V-core, is to increase or decrease the upper or lower voltage limit for the CPU voltage. I have that on a negative 0.040 volts. And what that means is when under certain restrictions and loads, the voltage is fixed to drop and only drop and allowed to drop at that amount of a level. Okay, so from 1.315 for me, it'll drop to 0.040, or not drop to that level, but drop by that amount and no more. Okay, that's something to think about and remember and note when we get into a couple of settings that are ahead of us. Okay, guys. But for your purpose, if you're doing an all core starting on around 5 gigahertz, I would probably leave that as auto as well. Okay, auto will be fine. V-clock adaptive voltage, on the other hand, leave that on auto. Okay, now on the other hand, when it comes back to your RAM, when you implement your XMP profile, the RAM voltage should also change as well, and that's called, in our case, the DRAM voltage. Now, unfortunately, when I implement my XMP profile on these gigabyte boards, the DRAM voltage does not implement and go to the right amount automatically, which means it'll more than likely be undervolted, and on auto may ask for more voltage than is needed, which will wear your RAM out quicker when generally they should last a bloody lifetime if they work fine to begin with. Okay, so remember to always look at your packet, your RAM in relation to what you got, and on there should say the actual volts they're rated at on the XMP profile that you activate, and put on that. For mine, it's 1.35 volts, so I had to physically put that in, otherwise it would have tried to have set it at 1.2 volts, which would have been interesting and may have worked and may have become unstable very quickly as a result, and you wouldn't understand what's going on. You think you've got faulty RAM, but that's because the XMP profile doesn't always have to just be set. You set the XMP, you'd always have to want to double check your RAM voltage as well to make sure it matches that XMP profile setting. Okay, guys. From there, you got your CPU I like to call it CPU Viscaccio, but it's your VCCIO. This can be useful in certain overclocking configurations. I like to put it up closer to the 1 volt in total. On default on this board is 0.950. I found that putting it up 3 clicks has helped me out regarding my stability. CPU system agent voltage, on the other hand, keep it on auto. VCC sustain, auto. VCC PLL, auto. VCC PLLOC, auto. VCC VTT, auto. PCH core, this is to adjust the voltage of a system chipset, or PCH core. This can also be useful in certain overclocking configurations. In my case, it's on auto, it's around 1.000 volts. I've put it up a couple of clicks in my case. You guys can leave it on auto at the beginning as well. It's once you try to get to do higher overclocks that you start to have to try to tweak other settings as well around your initial boost of increase in frequency on the all cores if you're just still using a fixed overclock method. Once here, go back up and we'll go into something like advanced CPU settings. Here, you've got other options. You can, put CPU over temperature protection. That's great because it'll stop your CPU and pretty much shut you down and say you've gone over temperature. And you can set that, say, at 96 degrees, where otherwise you want to stay away from going over 105, get me? But like as peaks, not as running temperature, guys. That's something to remember and understand, okay? So with that said, you can set that in and you can be rest assured that you're never going to go over it, but you might end up getting shutdowns quite more often than not because you may have left that CPU over temperature protection too low. I keep it on auto. Otherwise, these other settings I'm going to mention will help with your overclocks for a fixed all core overclock. They should be, generally speaking, disabled, okay? Hyperthreading technology. Keep it on auto or keep it on enabled because we love that, all right? Number of CPU cores enabled. Auto or the number you actually have, which is 10, okay? If you got a 10900K. VTD, that's your virtual stuff. I keep that disabled. I don't need it currently. Intel speed shift technology. This is something in relation to the overclock you want to disable, okay? CPU thermal monitor, auto. Ring to core offset downbin, auto. CPU EIST function, you want to keep this disabled, okay? Otherwise, if you have a look here, race to halt, RTH, auto. Energy efficient turbo, auto. Voltage optimization, auto. Now, Intel Turbo Boost technology. Normally, this is a great thing, including Intel Boost Technology 3.0. If you have it available on your screen at that time, disable both of them, okay? Because this can improve performance in single-threaded applications, but to be realistic, it may bring in instability in an all-core overclock, okay? CPU flex ratio override disabled. And apart from that, going down the list, everything else is on auto. Another thing, if you're struggling with stability, for example, things like memory boot, and it might be your memory that might be the issue. You may have tweaked that a little too high if you've already gone there. Okay, so things like memory boot mode, you want to disable the fast boot, okay? And then you want to go into things like memory enhancement settings and go into, rather than enhanced performance, everyone likes that, start off with enhanced stability, okay? And you can always try to enhance the performance later, but always work on one aspect of your overclock first and keep on that, test it for stability before you start going into other aspects, as well as especially then other components that help aid in your overclocks on the whole, guys. Now, if we go back into what are the advanced CPU settings, at least on the gigabyte boards, okay, so if we scroll all the way down, what we should eventually get to is advanced voltage settings. This is what I was saying in relation to the dynamic B core up here and that offset I've got for my overclock. Remember, yours can be on auto, but you'll still need to go into advanced voltage settings, where then you scroll down, everything here in regards to our overclocks for the time being can be in auto, okay? But you go into CPU VRM settings over here, and then because of that, you come into what is your load line calibration. You may have heard of that, okay? Now, load line calibration helps to prevent the CPU voltage drop when the system is under strenuous or 100% loading. It also improves CPU overclocking stability. It's something that is very, very great if done right, but poorly executed, it will cause instability, okay? And also something to remember, that the greater values may lead to higher V-core and higher CPU VRM temperatures, okay? So CPU V-core load line calibration, I've got mine on turbo, and it's pretty much been on turbo since 5 gigahertz all cores. So it's something to pop it on. Otherwise, your CPU V-core protection, auto's fine. VAXG protection, auto's fine. CPU vCore current protection, on the other hand, is what increases the power threshold before overcurrent protection limits power. Greater values are preferred for higher end overclocking scenarios. At auto, BIOS will automatically configure this setting, okay guys? But for my case, I found that I've managed to get away with turbo, okay? Otherwise, utilize auto in relation to that one, but your load line calibration, okay, coming back up here, you want to have that on at least high to begin with. If you can get away with turbo, even better, okay? But I'll suggest, in regards to you guys, and 4.9 gigahertz all cores, 5 gigahertz all cores, for that time, try it on high to begin with. That's one of the settings you definitely need to implement and not have on normal, standard, or auto, okay guys and girls? So with that being said, that pretty much covers all the items in relation to what needs to be addressed for this fixed overclock from default. And remember one other thing, when starting out, just pop everything on, in our case, load optimized defaults from beginning, okay? And just start on that, and then you can go through and put in those specific settings that I've been mentioning in relation to the overclocks that we're currently going to do. Another thing to consider and to potentially even do is you'll have saved profiles, okay, available on the majority of semi, if not any half decent motherboard, okay? So if you go into save profiles, okay, you can see here I've got some profiles already: standard, default working, 5 working OC, mess around, working in 2022, whatever, at the 5. Okay, I'm going to go into, you can go into your empty profile, for example, and I'm going to here enter 5.1 gigahertz OC 2022. That's all I can get, so 22 we'll call it. Then you hit OK, okay, profile is saved. But what you want to do is also make sure you load from that profile, all right? So what you can do is you can go to load optimized defaults, put everything on default, okay? Save the default profile as well, even though you've got it, if you've got any slight other tweaks, you know. So whatever profile you've currently got, for example, put that into a save profile and call that your saved default profile. Even though you can load optimized defaults, that profile you currently got may be slightly different because it's got XMP and all that already activated, and save that as a profile. Then go back, and once you do all these settings, save that as another profile. Now that profile, you want to go into load profiles, and now we want to load up what is essentially our current overclock, and that's what it's going to load up from boot. Okay, so once that's done, profile is loaded, and it'll be loading up, generally speaking, on boot as well. Once that's done, you can save and exit setup, and or save and restart computer, because that's what's going to happen as soon as you do. It'll also generally show you all the settings which have been changed. In our case, I haven't really changed any settings except for hyperthreading enabled and number of CPU cores enabled, all 10. So it'll ask you to readdress and save the configuration, and usually it'll say reset, but it means restart, okay? And that's where you cross your fingers, because the point of the game is to get into Windows stable first, and then start playing around and making sure that your overclock's gonna stick, guys. So let's go. Don't be afraid. Some certain things, memory configuration changes, that will require a restart and a reboot a couple of times. The system will do it all automatically for you, okay? But generally it should just restart and work its way in like normal. So my computer's gone through the checks and balances of readdressing what's been changed in the BIOS. Now delete to hit into setup and or let it run through. The point is to get into Windows safely and stably. So that's why I suggest do start off on the lower amounts before taking it up any higher. The aim is to avoid blue screens, but at least get blue screens rather than have complete and utter failure shutdowns. that will hurt your system more than just the basic blue screen will. Okay, guys, if for some reason you're running through a test and it gets halfway through a test, like Cinebench R20, for example, or R23, then understand that that means you probably only needed a little bit more CPU V-core or voltage. So if that from, say it's at 1.3 volts, you'd probably take it up to 1.3. I'll probably take it up to 1.320. Try that. If it's working fine, drop it down again and reassess. Remember, the key is to have as high a core clocks as you can, okay, as high a frequency as you can. But with that being said, you want to make sure that you're not using excess voltage, which causes excess heat, which causes excess power, and causes the fact that then it minimizes the capability and performance of that being able to be held for long periods of time. So it's a back and forth game until you get the sweet spot, which will be your all-day overclock, guys. So I hope this has helped you guys and at least enlighten some and or address beginner-wise the way to go. Always cross-reference your stuff. Actually, let's get this screen out of my face for a second. After all, it's Aorus, you know, and I'm generally an Aorus, but and or a Rog Strix type of a guy. Team up and fight on, guys. But with that being said, there are many ways of checking your stability. The ways and the better ways are using Prime 95 and ADA 64 for long-term stability. You let that run for 4 to 6 or 8 hours to 24 hours if you have the time. But otherwise, if you want to smash that CPU and make sure that at least it's going to hold something for heaven's sake, then you want to use things like Cinebench R15, R20, R23. Give it just sometimes slightly a little bit more voltage just at the end for my sake, because then it will just keep everything on the whole happier in the long run, running forward forevermore. For the rest of the life of the CPU, this is as much as I'll get personally, unless I, you know, use some sort of liquid nitrogen or want to completely decimate and kill the chip, frankly, at the end of its lifespan, which I probably won't do because I'm a tech enthusiast and I probably want to keep it for future reference and future sake. But in the meantime, guys, don't leave any performance on the table anymore. If you did have that bias envy, like I keep mentioning, just subdue yourself for a second, because these chips can handle a lot more, and hopefully you haven't got a dud. So with all that mumbo jumbo out the way, hope you guys got something out of this today. My name's been Seb Luka, and on your way out, don't forget to hit that like and or subscribe button. It helps me heaps. It helps with the algorithm, but also helps with my psyche. Continue on producing content for you all. Plenty of other content. Have a look up there. Otherwise, you can always subscribe up there. And like I said, my name's Sebastian Lucas. Peace out. And don't forget to cross-reference your shit. Bye.